Again. Oh, I think we're live. Let's see. Let me just make sure everything's working here. Live. Yep. Okay, and I'll send the accursed tweet out. And have to get the link here. Okay, there we go. God help us, we're live, Gary.
Oh boy.
So, yeah, we're going to give it a minute for people to maybe find us. Probably not. And then we'll go into it. In the meantime, just drink some tea.
Yay, discuss geopolitics that may or may not be approved on the platform we're using. Potential ban speedrun.
Oh, yeah. Let's do it. Okay. I think we're just going to go for it. If people find it, good. If not, oh well. Yeah, so this is largely, this is very improv. I haven't really done a lot of planning for this little podcast stream thing. I just asked my friend Gary here if he wanted to come discuss things. And it's mostly to do, as the title says, to talk about Afghanistan and the interesting situation that's happened overnight, which is that U.S. Air Forces have engaged in a bombing campaign against the Taliban as they are making inroads into Afghanistan much faster than anticipated. This includes assets from B-52 bombers to AC-130 Spectre gunships, and I believe also FA-18 Super Hornets from off the coast. So let's talk about how we're supposed to be disengaging from this country, but we're kind of seeming to bomb more people.
Oh, yeah. My immediate thought was I was pretty sure we were supposed to be leaving, but sure, go ahead, drop a bunch of payloads in a panic, because that's not going to look bad on the world stage.
No, it's definitely not. And I mean, I think so. This comes down to, in my opinion, this comes down to the fact that we decided to do a rapid withdrawal from the country rather than a drawdown.
Yeah. Oh boy, we left in a hurry and they picked up steam in a hurry because we had all suddenly gone overnight. I, for one, am shocked. Shocked, I tell you.
Very surprised. So yeah, the thing is with a drawdown, which is where you residually pull forces back from a conflict. It allows the local forces, theoretically, we know there's lots of corruption in Afghanistan, et cetera, et cetera. It allows local forces to be able to adapt a little bit better to your leaving.
Yeah, time to fill in certain positions that you might have been filling otherwise.
Right, and a rapid pullout with a date, a pullout date, is kind of what we actually did. And what that does is it creates a vacuum and chaos. We saw this in Iraq when Barack Obama pulled us out abruptly. You can get into the logistics of whether we should have been there or not, but the way we pulled out very rapidly to fulfill a campaign promise resulted in a vacuum, which ultimately ISIS formed, and now we're back in Iraq. So, that's something to consider. And this whole thing, I think, was exemplified when I think it was Bagram Air Base. We just abruptly left without apparently even telling the Afghan government in the middle of the night. And we left, I think it was 700 military vehicles and a full armory of weapons and ammunition.
And by the time they got there, they were being scrumped by a bunch of dudes who may or may not have been Taliban, yes.
Yeah, so that was not planned. Very, very similar, and I know a lot of people aren't liking to say this comparison, very similar to the fall of Saigon with Vietnam.
If you look that up, ladies and gentlemen, if you find this later, there's a lot of articles that are making this comparison too. So,
yeah, and I don't know. I think the war in Afghanistan, just from the beginning, has been so confused. Like, we originally went in to root out Al Qaeda after 9/11, which I think was good. We needed to do that, but we were I think the Bush administration was very, very risk adverse. So we didn't put a lot of boots on the ground immediately. We relied on the Pakistanis, who we decided were our allies kind of arbitrarily because they said they were, and something called the Northern
Ah,
Alliance. Yeah,
I was going to say, because you could always take people at their word, especially when it comes to geopolitics or internal politics.
right. And so, yeah, that resulted in kind of a big mess. Osama bin Laden fled over the border during the Battle of Tora Bora. There's actually some Task Force Orange veterans who, I mean, anonymously, but they claim that when they were on the mission hiking through the mountains in Tora Bora, that they saw a Pakistani helicopter fly over the border and a bunch of senior Al Qaeda members get in from across the valley. So that was cool. And ever since then, we kind of have just been in that country, not really knowing what we were doing, which I think was definitely a problem.
Yeah, I think the moment we didn't have a clear directive for our military, we probably should have committed to a what did you call it? Draw
Drawdown.
out. Yeah, draw down.
Yeah.
We
And
probably should have. We probably should have committed to one of those a lot sooner.
yeah. And I would definitely agree. And so what we ended up doing instead, I'm not saying this is bad by any means. I think humanitarian work is very good. We committed to um, building schools, educating, trying to bring some more Western values, bring businesses and industries into Afghanistan. And, Afghanistan actually was a fairly modern country before the Soviet invasion. Kabul, actually, very much so. It was really the Soviets that started all this. And what didn't help was that while we were in the process of using our military to basically help defend a modernizing of a country, which was never our plan to do so in the beginning, while also trying to deal with its local political scene and corruption and apply American values to it, which didn't exactly work. We also had a very constrained set of rules of engagement, meaning that unless the enemy was very visibly armed and they had already fired on you, you couldn't fire on them first. So even if you saw
Yeah,
enemy,
which
sorry, go ahead.
more than likely, I was to say, which more than likely resulted in more than a few casualties.
Hmm. Oh, absolutely.
Specifically, the you can't do anything until they shoot at you rule.
Right, and also, I mean, they could just move out in plain daylight and set IEDs and stuff, and there's really
Oh
anything
yeah,
you could
well,
have
because
done
they
about
weren't
it.
shooting at them, so they couldn't do anything about it. It's just like, oh, yep, just make sure we know where that bomb is for when we roll out the convoys later.
Yeah, and I mean, I know this doesn't sound like we're talking much about the current situation, but we've been in there for like 20 freaking years, so some context is definitely important.
There's a lot to talk about. We've been there a lot longer than we needed to be.
Right, and then so in the midst of all of that, I think for one reason or another, I think it's much more complicated than we went in for oil or to finish Daddy's War or whatever, like people like to say. Regardless of reason, we decided we needed to go into Iraq, but we had a problem at the same time where when we went into Afghanistan, George W. Bush, famously said, we won't distinguish between terrorists and the countries that harbor them. And then Al Qaeda went into Pakistan, we didn't follow them. So I guess we did distinguish because we weren't willing to finish
Yeah,
them.
I was gonna say, well, a fat lot of good that big talk, did you?
Yeah, I mean, it's my opinion. We should have gone into Afghanistan or Pakistan and just finished the freaking fight, but we didn't.
I'm not saying Pakistanis would have been happy to have terrorist cells over there. But would they have let us do that? Because that could present a really bad image to the people. Yeah,
absolutely would not have. We would have had to go to war with Pakistan. But I mean, the alternative is a potential 2-year war, or you have a situation much like again Vietnam with Cambodia, where you had the Viet Cong going out of the borders of Vietnam to move their troops and come back into Vietnam to attack us, knowing that we couldn't follow them into Cambodia or Laos. We have the Taliban and Al Qaeda, which Taliban sheltered Al Qaeda, allowed them to train, and then Al Qaeda in turn strengthened the Taliban to fight the U.S. occupation. They were using Pakistan with impunity to carry out attacks on coalition forces, and we couldn't do anything about it. So not a great lesson from history that we apparently didn't learn. And then on top of that, we decided we needed to get involved in Iraq, which Surprise, surprise, that's another huge can of worms that didn't go very well. Um, and all the while, we're just sitting here, just building schools and being shot at and just driving around aimlessly. We started building some, like, forward operating bases up in the hills and on the border with Pakistan and stuff like that, but they never got to do missions. They just basically would get shot at, and then eventually we'd close up shop and then leave those outposts. So we fought very defensively. And then the last little 2 bits of history before we get on to kind of the main meat of this conversation is things did change a bit in 2010 when the 75th Rangers had a 120-man team called Task Force Merrill, which did not fight defensively or engage in nation building. They actually took the fight to the Taliban. They would essentially go into the nastiest parts of Afghanistan at night and then fight the Taliban until daybreak. They they would pay, and this is pretty morally gray. I'm not condoning what we did. I think some of it's pretty bad, honestly. But these Rangers, they would pay families to abandon their homes. Then they would fortify these homes and then announce to the Taliban that they were there. And the Taliban would come and fight. And on average, the Rangers would kill like 100 enemy fighters per engagement. And this only went on like for a couple of months. And things did get pretty dicey, though, as the rules of engagement started to loosen. And it got to the point where the Rangers actually started targeting any male of military age, which is no bueno. And finally, after 2 months of this just constant fighting, the Taliban actually straight up abandoned that part of the country because they were just losing constantly. So it did prove kind of what Winston Churchill said, which is that war is an ugly thing, and the uglier it gets, the sooner it'll end. I'm kind of paraphrasing there. And so this kind of operational tempo was starting to turn the tide of the war until, and this is kind of the first thing I'm going to pop up on the screen here. So you have the 75th Rangers, involved all throughout eastern Afghanistan. And then something really bad happened. During a night raid, one of these kinds of missions, a Chinook got shot down, killing a lot of people. It was called Extortion 17, and it was one of the darkest days in Navy SEAL history. Killed tons of Navy SEALs, killed some Rangers, killed the entire crew and their service dog. Terrible, terrible stuff. But instead of doubling down, I think the Pentagon kind of ran away and said, well, we can't fight in this part of the country anymore. So no longer were we just fighting enemies that had impunity in Pakistan, now they had impunity in half of Afghanistan as well.
Oh boy.
And so, yeah, things got worse and worse. And so finally, at this point, it's pretty well a foregone conclusion that we were going to lose this war. But, yeah, that kind of brings us to the main reason why I kind of invited you on to talk about this with me, Gary, which is a common interest we both had recently, which is the, to quote a former president, the peaceful rise of China.
Yes, the land of cultural differences.
Yes, and its connection to Afghanistan and our current situation. So,
Yep.
last week, senior Taliban leadership apparently was invited out to Beijing to meet with senior CCP officials, and a week later, they're just massacring people all throughout Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of doesn't seem a coincidence.
I was reading somewhere that part of the reason that we had scrambled so many things for a bombing campaign was that we had also paired it with very panicked messages to any Americans staying there to very swiftly pack their shit up and get home.
Yeah, and which is again.
So it sounds to me like our government is expecting a whole lot of people hoisted around public square.
Well, and again, that's very much like the wonderful, terrible event that was the fall of Saigon, with Americans having to be rushed out of Saigon on helicopters because the North Vietnamese were overrunning the city. And there's some media outlets that are trying to downplay this currently going on, saying don't compare it to Fall of Saigon. I will compare it to Fall of Saigon.
I mean, as I pointed out when you mentioned it earlier, you're only doing it because they're doing it. Because in typical fashion, the media outlets are like, it's not this thing. That just makes me think it's the thing, considering you also think that, apparently.
Right. And, yeah, the other thing that I think is going on with this current situation in Afghanistan is one of the two territories, after doing some reading, one of the two territories that has been, let's say, taken by the Chinese, sorry, it's Floridian there. The Taliban is currently a hotspot for opium production in Afghanistan. And the other one recently has had lots of opium production in it, though it's recently been cartelled. So I find that to be kind of just a little bit suspicious. So,
you got one area that they took over that produces a ton of a crippling drug, and the other one, if cartel means what I think it does, well, you just so happen to have the ability to move it around.
Well, it was curtailed. It's kind of been like
curtailed,
but
okay, curtailed. I heard cartelled, and I was like, I wouldn't be surprised.
Don't mind me. I can't speak English.
No, I think you can speak perfect English. I just don't think my ears work all the time.
Fair enough. Mine don't either. Nor does my mouth. But yeah, so it's no secret at this point that China has some kind of shady dealings when it comes to, let's see, human trafficking, the drug trade. I mean, they're the primary manufacturers of fentanyl, which is a huge problem that's degrading a lot of Western countries. They are the primary importers of human sex slaves from the Eastern Bloc cartels. They are the primary exporter of harvested organs, and there's a lot of suspicion that they're harvesting organs from Uyghurs from the concentration camps. And so, sorry.
Also, to add to the list of people that are suspected that they're harvesting from, it's particularly Uyghur Muslims and Falun Gong practitioners, which is a practice that they have cracked down on since the late 1990s.
Right. And also, there's the whole little bit of we'll get into the concentration camps later, because there is a connection with all of this with the Uyghurs.
We'll concentrate on them, says you.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. But, so I don't think it's really a huge stretch to say that the country that has the largest opium production in the world would be of geopolitical interest to China to get in on, for a couple reasons. Obviously to continue to break down society in Western countries that are fighting the drug war, but also to get more money through illegal activities.
Yeah. What I'm looking forward to is all the news that mainland Chinese don't get to see about how many of their fucking production plants catch fire because they're idiots. Anyway.
Yeah, that does happen semi-regularly, doesn't it?
Yep.
Well, and then let's see here. Where did I put that tab? There it is. Yeah, so I think the timing of this is very suspicious. The Chinese connection with meeting with the Taliban just last week. Now, this huge offense that happens to be in areas of opium production, not to mention the head of Afghanistan's, chief media person was just assassinated in Kabul by the Taliban yesterday, I want to say. And there's the other fact that a lot of people don't seem to realize, which is shocking to me, that Afghanistan shares a border with China, and China does not want the American military on its border. So they have a huge interest in getting us out of there.
Yep. And wouldn't you know, the place that it shares the border with is the same one rumored to be the worst of the concentration camps for the Uyghurs.
Yeah, Shenzhen is literally like right there. So where is that? Yeah. So over here you have the Wakhan quarter. I'm probably butchering how I pronounce that. For someone who spent most of my life studying Afghanistan, I'm still really bad at pronouncing this stuff. But it's this really unique border region between Kazakhstan and Pakistan, where it's just this very narrow strip of land that goes from Afghanistan straight into China. And on the Chinese side of it is Xinjiang, where all of the concentration camps are. And what do they call it? The Uyghur Autonomous Zone or something like that, which is hilarious considering that there's nothing autonomous about it. It's just what the Chinese government
Uh,
call it.
According to the state-run media, there are more Uyghurs born than ever, and nothing wrong is happening in China because there is no war in Ba Sing Se. How dare you?
Right? Yeah, that's my bad. I forgot. The party is great.
I ran across that claim from one of their loyalists in a comment section, and that was the wildest thing to me, that they tried angrily to claim that more Uyghurs had been born than ever. And it's like, one, I don't believe that. Two, if they were, then they were brainwashed to be loyal to your dickbag government.
Right. And oh, much like Disney, I just want to thank the concentration camp runners for letting us talk about Shenzhen. Um,
Letting us borrow it for the podcast.
oh my god. So yeah, and so I think an educated guess that's probably way off, but something tells me it might not be at the same time, is if you know what was discussed in Beijing. I think President Xi was probably quite adamant, as well as several of the PLA generals, humiliate the United States as they're trying to draw down and they think that they have these deals with you. Break those deals, kill as many civilians as you can, kick them out, force them to start bombing you again to get egg on their face, which will help our long term goal. Get them out of the country even sooner. And in exchange, we will arm you and support your overthrow of the Afghan government. And when you set up a new government, as long as it's communist, we will help rebuild the country under the Belts and Roads Initiative.
Which, is the same paperwork we use to debt trap Africa, among other countries. But pay no attention to the fact that those countries are a debt trap to us. And that it doesn't seem to be helping us either, because holy crap, the absolute state of mainland China.
Yeah, no, the things are terrible in mainland China right now. But, if the Taliban want that, I mean, I guess they could. We were leaving anyway, but if they want that.
Listen. Wait, okay, so for the people in those countries that don't support them, awful. But if the terrorist assholes that want us dead want that for their countries, by all means, you can be the next South Africa. You go ahead. Yeah. Do you, King.
Be all you can be. So, oh man, the other thing with that whole border thing, though, is something that I have literally not seen a single person or analyst or author or think tank talk about, is the strategic importance of Afghanistan to the United States in this new Cold War with China. We already talked about that border region, and
yeah,
I've heard a lot about the fact that the Chinese coast is heavily fortified. And even the Pentagon has admitted that in war games they have lost naval wars against the Chinese and have failed to make landings into mainland China. So most of China's military is geared towards defending against naval invasions. Most of their population and most of their assets are in eastern China. So why did we just abandon the only border crossing that we could have used through land to completely do that? Not only just to get into China, but immediately free the Uyghurs. If we really care about the concentration camps, like the liberation of Auschwitz and all of the other concentration camps under the Nazis, that should be one of our first priorities, is saving people who are oppressed by this regime. And we literally were right on the border of it. If we should ever get into a war, you could immediately save those people and have a staging area that you could invade the rest of the country through.
Yep. Well, we let it go because Quote, former President Obama, America's time as a world power is over, man. China's just got some cultural differences. We could totally learn from them, guys.
Do you mean, do you mean Biden, not Obama?
No, that was something Obama said, but I'm mocking Biden as well. Because this seems to generally be the position of the left.
Right. Well, and okay, I'm just,
was what I'm implying.
I'm gonna just so we're being fair here. And I mean, I guess we already are kind of fair because I threw quite a bit of shade at George W. Bush already. I'm also gonna throw some shade at Trump just a little bit and say, why did he not state the importance of this border crossing region?
That's a good point because he did sanction China quite a bit, but he never really talked about what we need to do in case that ever happens. Because it's not like it couldn't have happened under his administration. Hell, I expected it to happen under his administration based on the fact that he was strangling our economy.
Right. Well, yeah.
And also kicking them the hell out of ours, which still needs to happen. And to current administration's credit, I have seen here and there that they are slowly booting out the worst of it, apparently.
Yeah, no, I'll give Biden some credit on this. I think he's been a lot stronger on China than I thought he would be. But, I mean, I'm still just kind of flabbergasted about the decision to leave Afghanistan and leave this huge... You know, this goes so much deeper, too, because even if we're looking under Cold War footing, you know, forget the war in Afghanistan and all of its trappings, we probably should have stayed simply because one of our major adversaries right now is Iran as well, and they share a border with Afghanistan. And by leaving, we're basically creating a direct corridor for China to send weapons and goods into Iran.
Yeah, which, again, Iran is allied to them, and I'm fairly certain they could probably convince Iran and Afghanistan to work together, especially if it's under a puppet regime that they personally dictate to. So that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I've been called kind of a relic of the Cold War, but I still believe in domino theory.
I remember when you told me that.
I still believe in a thing called domino theory, which is that if you allow one country to fall into the sphere of communism, that its neighboring countries will too.
Well, the thing is, I believe that as well, because it's literally what happened with the last Cold War. It's like Soviet Russia was allowed to spread its influence. How much of just anything neighboring it eventually went red as a result? A whole hell of a lot.
Well, and the thing is, a lot of people will point to Vietnam and say, well, if that's true, why did all of Asia not go red after Vietnam? It's like, well, you have to consider that Vietnam had no interest in pursuing the global revolution after fighting such a bloody war with the United States, to the point where as soon as we left, I think a lot of other countries, were terrified of, hey, let's not go communist because then the United States will come and we'll be stuck in a 12-year war with them. And the other thing with that is that Vietnam just wanted to rebuild their country, and then when China came and said, okay, now it's time to spread the revolution, join us, Vietnam basically said, screw you, and asked the United States to back them against China, which is one of the greatest hilarious ironies of 20th century history, in my opinion.
With the fact that Vietnam told China to go fuck itself.
Well, and then became kind of a pseudo-ally of the United States immediately after the war in trade.
Well, yeah, I presume part of it was because, like, if China eventually went down that way and said, go red or get dead, they were like, well, in fairness to us, all the countries you forced to do that aren't really doing well.
Yeah, they went red and
they went red and they're still dead.
Exactly. So, yeah, and, man. So, you know, I know I kind of agree with a few people that have said this. I think Rob O'Neill is one. Rob O'Neill, who, for those who don't know, he's the Navy SEAL who killed bin Laden with the SEAL Team 6 team. And he also agreed that we've been in Afghanistan too long and we needed to leave. But, and he's not the only person I've heard say this, we need to leave a residual force, keep Bagram Air Base, and have a good security sense around it and a good human intelligence network, as well as a couple SEAL teams and some Ranger quick response teams. That way, if there are any instances that
Just
pop
in
up,
case.
we can deal with them.
I was going to say, like, for example, them suddenly cutting a bloody path through the country because we didn't do that.
Right. And, there was nothing stopping us from doing that. Like, we could have said, go to hell, the rest of Afghanistan, like, we're not going to be your police anymore, but if you get into a bad situation with the Taliban, we'll send air support you. And we chose not to do that.
I was going to say, and then we left very quickly today, and were forced to do that.
Right, yeah, it's just so dumb. But,
I'm just concerned, because, like, it's not as though, like, it was bad enough that, like, China could just sit there, diplomat to diplomat, and just, like, lecture ours for 15 minutes when it comes to Alaska or anything else, just like, you can't speak to China from a position of strength. Your narrative is that you kill a disproportionate amount of black people, and you're a bad country for it. And it's just like, well, I mean, that is the narrative they run with, so they've kicked themselves in the nuts. Can you imagine how much worse that's going to get once they correctly point out, like, oh, you said you were going to leave, and then you started bombing brown people again? I mean, they would do the same thing, but it allows them to grandstand to the rest of the world.
Well, yeah, we've basically created a narrative that the Chinese can just very quickly use against us. It's basically loading the revolver and then handing it to your enemy and saying, just don't shoot me with this.
Don't shoot me with this, to which your enemy's going to reply, a full cylinder, says you.
Yeah. Hey, Russian roulette with 6 rounds in the chamber and you go before me, or 6 rounds in the cylinder, this seems like good odds. I take that bet.
At which point the person who handed you all these things is like, haha, you fool, and then you shoot them and they're just like, ow.
Yeah. And there is a possibility, because the Taliban is very xenophobic, there is a distinct possibility that they will reject China's claim or desire to help rebuild the country, and when they do that, we might see China become militarily involved in Afghanistan.
What I'm kind of interested to see is, I know, as you said, and this is why everyone else thinks they're just not going to cooperate with China when it comes to the ETIM thing I mentioned, where they're trying to get them to stop working with this front that specifically says, free the Uyghurs, fuck China, which I absolutely agree with, and I don't really care if they take it the radical direction, because, to be honest, you're not going to shake that government loose any other way. But,
right.
just as you say, every branch of that country is incredibly xenophobic, and they were doing awful, awful things to our troops because they were perceived as invaders. What's going to happen to China when they start setting things up and then trying to treat countries like that the way they treat other countries on the world stage who can't afford to just tell them, if you don't knock it off, we're going to turn you into a pile of nuclear glass? Like, they're going to do that, and then these guys are just going to be like, apparently you haven't seen what we've been doing to much more developed militaries for the last 20 years, so here's videos of your women unconsensually producing our children, and your fucking would-be soldiers march through our squares and being forced to denounce their faith to your dipshit party.
Well, and, I would be very curious to see how China's military perform, because it could go a couple ways. The first, most obvious one is that China's military is really experienced, the Taliban is very experienced, and that they would wipe the floor with them and make it worse than we did. However, if we go back to the situation I was referencing with, what was the name of the team? It was Team Merrill, the Ranger team, which just did not give a shit about the rules of engagement and just brought the war to the Taliban. They won decisively every single time. And I don't think China would be as constrained by being nice as we would, so it's entirely possible they could just wipe the floor with the Taliban. So I don't know which way it would go.
I wonder something else, which is, and this is one that a lot of people probably don't realize is happening. China and India keep butting heads. I know it's a different part of the world, but what I think is going to happen is, if they start treating the Chinese for overstepping their bounds the way they treat most outsiders, if not all, I think they do eventually try to go for a military response. And if they do it wrong, it'll be around the same time that one of the other powers which they're currently threatening and or clashing with just finally decides, you know what, piss off our border. And I think that they end up in a very, very famous situation called the Two-Front War, which you may note ended a very particular empire.
Yeah.
Like what? Late 1940s?
Yep. Yeah, no, that was not the funny mustache man's greatest moment.
No, it was not. And I think there is definitely potential for the peaceful rising nation to make the same mistake with probably way more disastrous consequences.
It's definitely a possibility. So yeah, I'm very curious to see what will happen with that. What I'm not curious to see is what Afghanistan's going to look like as soon as we officially are gone. I think it's going to be horrible. I think it's going to be one of the worst humanitarian crises we've seen in decades.
And I can promise you that if China manages to get their hands on the opium production, that there's going to be a weird spike in that area of drug use and other things. And if that works out, I can see this really dark future where, say, maybe 5-10 years down the line, this country is weirdly turning away from its faith because it's like people are using the poor condition of the country to lie about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that because the Afghanistan is a very religious country, and I think that's one of the mistakes we made with it is we tried to turn it secular, and that just went against.
Yeah, that's. I wonder. I don't think it'll be nearly as successful in the Middle East as it. I don't know if it was specifically here. I think some faith just fell out as a result of times like marching on and things like that. But it wouldn't surprise me to learn that the Communist Party would at least attempt to poison the idea of religion, especially if it's like central to assassinating the identity of a country.
Right.
Because that is quite literally how these stupid fucking slime bags work. Is they'll be like, oh, we'll buy this up, and then we'll get people favorable to us in your institutions, and then they'll start saying all this awful shit about everything you believe, and the next thing you know, oh hey, look, the Red Revolution is a good thing, and then it turns out not to be a good thing.
Right. Yeah, I honestly have no idea. It's such a mixed bag.
I wouldn't doubt that they try it. I just don't think it's going to go over as well in the Middle East as it has anywhere else they've probably tried it. Because I feel like if they start insulting their faith, immediately, pretty much all of them are just going to be like, yeah, you're not welcome here anymore. Well, here's a very noisy boot.
Well, and okay, so this is where things start to get kind of interesting with Afghanistan, is that it actually was so the Northern Alliance, which I referenced earlier, which was basically an alliance of all of the northern tribe lands that basically kind of descended from the Mujahideen that fought the Soviets. We rallied to fight Al-Qaeda. But what's funny about that is that the Northern Alliance was largely communist. Like the parts of northern Afghanistan were very communist at the time. And so Afghanistan has had communism before in some shape or another. And again, so I'm curious to see, like, will they try and lean into that part of Afghanistan's history, or will they just try to avoid the political conversion that the Chinese I'm referring to for a while out of fear of people remembering the Soviet invasion to spread communism. It's kind of a mixed bag.
I'm kind of wondering about that now. I'm kind of wondering how the rest of the country saw northern Afghanistan, being that it was communist. Because if they weren't, maybe they got a bad impression from it, especially after the Soviet invasion.
Maybe. And there's an entire other podcast we're gonna have to do someday on this weird tendency of the United States to support communist groups post Cold War. And how it always backfires.
Yeah, I was going to say, and then because we're still run by a bunch of old war hawks who make their money off how many bombs we drop, 20 years later, we're like, haha, we'll put these in all our popular media as the bad guy. Oh no, why don't they like us anymore?
Yeah, oh my gosh. Like, you've got Syria.
That is exactly what we did to Soviet Russia after World War II, if I recall.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah, it was like we were friends for a long time, and then slowly but surely, Soviet bloc folks started showing up as shootable bad guys.
Well, I mean, so technically, the reason things fell apart in the first Cold War was because it turns out the Soviet Union had infiltrated all of our nuclear weapon development with spies, and we didn't like that very much. And then
I was going to say, and back then we had a sensible reaction to it that was not this slow attempt at pulling weeds.
Right, and then the big one, though, I mean, we knew that we weren't going to be friends with them for long anyway. The Soviets knew that we weren't going to be friends. It came down to we really weren't friends at the end of the war when we raced to take Berlin, because Berlin got separated, east and west. But basically, that was kind of the point where the Soviets wanted to take over the rest of Europe, and we were in their way, so they, I think that was inevitable. I don't think that was necessarily our fault.
No, not necessarily. But also, I just want to point something out, which is that after it was split into East and West, I'm not saying much, but I am saying that I know for a fact, historically, a lot of people tried to leave East Berlin for West.
Oh, yeah.
Because one side had chosen food and the other just did not.
I mean, I used to know someone who fled, and, she's since died, but she was an interesting person. But back, and that's another thing I could actually see happening in Afghanistan is if the Taliban go as bad as I think they're going to go in terms of massacring every girl that's been educated since we've been there and killing all their enemies. I think there will be potentially there could be an international response and us going back, and we could see Afghanistan split into a West Afghanistan and East Afghanistan.
We're gonna see it balkanize into the side that was okay with us funding education programs, and the side that is very much, my religion says they belong subservient to men.
So I think, oh my gosh, I hadn't even thought of that. That could actually happen, where we end up having a West Afghanistan and East Afghanistan, just like during the Cold War, with China on the east side and NATO on the west side. That is ridiculous.
I was going to say that would be probably the least disastrous thing we could hope for, considering
honestly,
just see a direct way in.
Honestly, yeah, that could kind of be the best case scenario. Unfortunately.
We had a much better one, but then we decided, no, we don't want to keep direct route to these people that have repeatedly made it clear that they're just going to keep rubbing our noses in the carpet like we're disobedient dogs because, it's like, what's the best way to undermine a country? Make them look weak on the world stage and then be like, but we won't do that because we push hyper-nationalism and our players were caught saying gamer words to other Asian countries in the Olympics. That was a thing.
Yeah. Well, on that front... Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was to say, because this is kind of a criticism of Chinese hyper-nationalism in the mainland, have you seen the clips I'm talking about? Where, I believe it's one of their ball sports. One of their players was caught repeatedly saying what sounded like the F word, according to the other players.
I haven't seen that.
And
that's funny.
And then the Chinese lady that was doing it was saying that she was saying something else. Her accent was just off, which sounds to me like a bad excuse. And then there's another really funny, super immature clip from another guy that I saw where he's walking behind. I believe it might have been a Taiwanese dude. And he walks up behind him and he goes, I winner, you loser, okay? And it's like, you, sir, are an ass on the Olympic stage. You might want to stop being an ass.
And this was a Chinese athlete that did that?
Yes, it was.
That's
another Chinese rep because they push hyper-nationalism. So have this funny idea that everywhere that isn't mainland China sucks.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the 1936 Berlin team. But, you know.
I can only imagine the things that were being said then.
Well, just in general, back then, Germany, as you might expect, was exceptionally arrogant towards everyone else.
Yeah, I was going to say Germany was very big-headed. I'm particularly curious to know what they were saying to America back then, especially if you know about the one athlete that we let represent us.
Who he won the gold?
Yeah, and he won the gold, and even their chief had to clap for him.
I cannot remember his name for the life of me, which I need to remember that. Having a brain fart. I've had too much caffeine at this point, but
yeah, no, I'm sure that the 1930s Berlin boys had some wholesome things to say about being beaten by a certain color of man.
Right, and dude, I would have loved to have seen
anyway
bad mustache man's face.
Enough about us ragging on Dad Mustache Man. I mean, it is another fascist.
Right, yeah.
It's the wrong one.
You know, I think I'm probably going to title this episode "Let's Talk About Afghanistan," but actually, it's China.
Let's talk about China-stan.
Yeah, but I mean, it's relevant though. Like, if you know what's going on, you can't discount the Chinese component to it, and the fact that they're right there is pretty important. I wonder what Russia's going to do. Because I know Russia is pretty close to Afghanistan with everything going on. I wonder how they're going to handle this.
Yeah, I'm very curious about that. Because, I mean, this might shock you, but despite their declarations, supposedly, that they would work together, they don't seem especially fond of each other, Russia and China. And I think it's quite the convenient development that America has pulled back. Mm-hmm. And that China is now probably going to invest in Afghanistan and be like, hey, you could totally be friends with us.
Could be. You could actually have... I could totally see Russian and Chinese construction firms competing for contracts with the Afghan government to try and rebuild infrastructure. It's going to be very interesting to see.
Well, yeah, because whoever wins that's got a way better position in the upcoming Palooza.
Mm-hmm. Well, and
just for the record, a lot of people out there are probably thinking this will never come to war. I'm increasingly of the opinion that it's probably wrong.
I mean, historically, China and the Russians don't like each other. Most people don't realize, in fact, it was in Xinjiang. The Russians and the Chinese actually fought a very brief war during, what was it, 1963, I want to say? It was like during Vietnam. They had like a brief border skirmish. They've never liked each other. That stems down to the differences between Maoist communism and Stalinist communism.
Yeah.
Both of them claiming
I was gonna say, what communists infighting? Surely you jest.
No way. And again, obviously Russia is not communist anymore. In fact, I think they're probably one of the least communist countries in the world, ironically.
A lot of people have said that they are now firmly capitalist and conservative, and I have seen through the rumor mill that they have literally have books that are essentially the USSR is stupid and so are you, a guide.
Yeah, I have one on my bookshelf. Hang on, let me grab it.
Very good.
Yeah, it's one I talk about a lot. It's the Gulag Archipelago, which is standard reading in Russian high schools.
Yeah, no, I've heard that they push a lot of stuff like that, and they should, because it went very poorly for them.
Mm-hmm. And so that's going to be interesting to see what Russia does. The relationship between Russia and China, honestly, reminds me, and we keep going back to this time period. It frankly reminds me of relationship between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. Like, they're allies, but they really don't like each other.
I was going to say, well, we keep going back to that time period because if you look at the current world map, apart from the fact that one of them is no longer communist, the other is fascist and genocidal and definitely persecuting people based on religion, pushes hyper-nationalism so that they think every country other than theirs sucks, are apparently teaching their brainwashed children that bloody revenge against every country that's done them wrong is the only way that they'll ever be glorious.
Yeah,
and the other happens to be the people that they have to cross a mountain range to punch, which sounds very familiar.
Yeah. Well, so, yeah. As I've often said, I think that fascism, hardcore totalitarian fascism, hardcore totalitarian communism, excuse me, are basically the same thing. They're just the same destination, well, with different
Same
routes leading to them.
destination. Yeah, I was to say, same destination, slightly different boat.
Yeah, basically, there was a fork in the road. It was the illusion of choice. Like, it's a video game, right? It's a dialogue chase in a badly made video game.
BioShock.
I would say BioShock's bad.
I was going to say illusion of choice and branching choices in a video game, BioShock, because they all end up leading to Andrew Ryan. Bad video game, no.
Yeah.
Illusion of choice, very much.
Yeah, so it's like, they tell you up front, it's like, well, this will lead to a completely different type of utopia if you go fascist. Or, if you go communist, you're going down a very different road, and it'll lead to a different world. And then you take both. You play through the first playthrough communist, and then you see what it's like, and you're like, that's the bad end. And then you play through it fascist, and then you see it has the same ending, and you're like, what the hell?
Yeah, and then you read one line, from Lenin, and it's not like you can misinterpret it, because it's quite clear in what it says that effectively serves as the true ending, which is that was it Lenin or Marx that was like, socialism is the baby steps to communism. The way he put it was that it was
Marx.
It was. Oh, sorry, I thought it was Lenin.
Yeah, no.
But yeah, no. Marx even said, and he was one of the first people I think, to really pen the idea, was socialism is just the road to communism.
Yeah,
and I think you can trust the guy who came up with the idea.
It's referred to as the road.
People helped.
It's the theory is actually, I believe, called the road to communism, which is that all capitalistic societies collapse into socialism, and socialism ultimately collapses into communism.
Which ultimately collapses into an irrecoverable shit heap. Anyway.
Which ultimately collapses into itself, yeah.
Which ultimately collapses into an anus that needs a doctor. Anyway.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't know if there's a whole lot more insight that I can really think of us to talk about with Afghanistan, other than that, surprise to anyone listening, this is something that's probably going to become common. Most topics are going to lead to China because they're kind of a big deal right now.
All roads lead to China currently, as do the belts. Try not to follow them. It's a silly place.
The belts, well, you see, that's the thing, is you take the road to China, and then you have to tighten your belt because you don't eat.
Oof. And you definitely don't put belts over the roads, because they'd be produced cheaply and break down within a week.
Yeah, and okay, so I guess I'll end on more of a serious note, because it is a big deal. And like I mentioned, I think it was kind of the turning point in the war where we basically decided ourselves that we were going to lose. But Extortion 17 was a absolute sad day, and the anniversary of it was actually yesterday.
Oh no.
So, yeah, definitely not a great point in our history, especially not a great point in our Special Operations Command history. The worst JSOC disaster since Operation Red Wings, the lone survivor situation, and then Mogadishu before that, and then Operation Desert Town before that. So to all of those who died in Extortion 17, thank you for your service, and to all the families, thank you for your service as well. I guess that's kind of the last thought I have.
Yeah, I'm kind of in that same boat. Thank you to the servicemen we lost, and to the families grieving for it. I wish you a swift recovery, I suppose.
Yeah.
I've been wrong thing off at.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is that it was 10 years ago already. But sorry, continue.
Oh no, I thought we were just going to sign off. So.
Oh, that's my bad. We're inexperienced at this.
If you can't tell, this isn't some scripted professional thing. This is just the last two coffee beans rattling around in the can, as it were.
Yeah, pretty much. So, well, thanks for joining me, Gary.
Yep.
What was it you wanted to go by for this?
I am Wrong Thing Top Hat, and I'll see if the gulags don't get to me first.
There you go. That's a good sign off if I've ever seen one. I'll catch you guys.